Good morning, afternoon, or evening to everybody joining us at our session here today on COVID safe recovery, insights and tools for 2021 and beyond. My name is Rachel Reed. I'm the Director of Insight at ETOA, which is the European Tourism Association. For those of you that don't know us, we are a trade association for buyers and suppliers of European tourism product. And we're going to be covering various pieces of consumer sentiment research. Just to let you know ahead of time, most of those pieces are available for you to download from our Insight Hub, which is etoa.org/insight, should you wish to access the pieces of research that we talk about in more detail. I'm delighted to have with me today David Edwards, who is our Tourism Insight Specialist here at ETOA. And in a moment, he's going to kick off the session with the latest research on traveller sentiment. We also have representatives of two major European destinations here with us to give us the perspective on what the destinations are doing to really give visitors a fantastic COVID-safe experience. I have Santiago Garcia de la Vega, who is from the Tourist Office of Seville. So very warm welcome, Santi. And I have Elodie Berta, who's Head of Business Development at the Paris Convention and Visitors Bureau. So a warm welcome to you too, Elodie. We look forward to hearing your perspectives a little later in the session. So let us begin, and I will hand straight over to David Edwards. So David, what is the latest picture with regards to how consumers are feeling about travelling this year and next year?
Thank you very much indeed, Rachel, and good morning to everyone. And as you say, good afternoon or good evening, depending upon where you are. So yes, indeed, for the next 10-15 minutes or so, I'm going to take us through a range of different research, and I've entitled this International Tourism Trends and Prospects. So what are we going to be covering in the next wee while? Well, we'll take a look at demand, both recent trends and some forecasts. We'll spend most of our time thinking about traveller sentiment, so how people are feeling at present. Briefly touch on vaccination and the degree to which that is our route to recovery, and then present a perspective on future prospects before we have our broader chat. So we will begin at the beginning with a look at recent trends. And this is perhaps one of the most compelling charts that UNWTO, the United Nations World Tourism Organization, has ever published. So we can see the grey line, which takes us back to how international tourism looked back in the long lost era that was 2019. And then the green shaded area on the chart, well, that is how last year panned out. So there were those first few weeks of near normality, but then of course the rest, as they say, is history. We can see that there was a little bit of an uplift in peak summer of 2020 before figures started to taper again. Looking at the current year, well, there's very limited data available thus far, but that which there is certainly suggests that Q1 of 2021 is going to see declines of a similar magnitude to that which we experienced last year. So typically, most destinations welcoming about 70 to 80% fewer international visitors than was the case back in 2019. So what about forecasts? So this is some data put together by Tourism Economics for the European Travel Commission. And this chart indices inbound to Europe at 100 back in 2019, and then looks at what the forecasts are. So some of you may recall that a year or so ago, people were talking about a V-shaped recovery. Well, we can certainly see that the latest prognosis isn't really V-shaped. It's more of a lopsided L shape, with all of the decline happening in 2020, and then it taking until 2024 before numbers are back to where they were pre-pandemic. Now, what we tend to find with forecasts is that they will be a straightish line, but reality is likely to be somewhat different to that. So even if we end up in 2024, where this projection suggests, the pathway towards that is unlikely to be as straight as we see here. Now let's think then about traveller sentiment, and we'll begin by looking at trends in overall consumer confidence. And this is data from OECD. And there's a range of different countries that I've picked out. The black line on the charts that you see is the OECD average for consumer confidence. And then in each of the 6 charts, and I've chosen 6 important markets for international tourism, we can see how consumers are feeling there. Just 2 markets that I will pick out. Top middle in red, that's China. And we can see that in China, generally consumers did see a decline in confidence spring of 2020, but that has rebounded very, very strongly. And now compared to OECD overall, consumers in China very upbeat. Whereas bottom left, Japan, we can see again that plunge in confidence, but the recovery has been much less marked. And indeed, we have seen in the last 24 hours, the US advising against all travel to Japan because of a growth in COVID cases there and the fact that only 4% of the population has been vaccinated. So a really good reminder that the pandemic is still at very different stages around the world. Now, this is data from the European Travel Commission, and they've been polling European travellers. And what this chart does is look at travel intentions over the next 6 months. And it's up to you whether you take a glass half full or a glass half empty view of what this chart is telling us. We can see that approaching half of international travellers in Europe are saying they are either very likely or likely to make an international trip in the next 6 months, whereas up to a third in the red and the orange are saying, no, I'm really not very likely at all. And then we've got about a fifth who are somewhat neutral. What then is concerning global travellers? This is data from a comprehensive survey by STR, and they quizzed international travellers in North America, mainland Europe, and the UK. And one of the things they asked them, well, what's troubling you at the present time? And respondents could tick as many or as few of these options as they wished. And we can see that a variety of things are indeed concerning them. But summarising, we can spot that government measures to mitigate risks are important. So too are concerns about how other travellers may behave. But also we can spot in this chart that the denuded visitor experience are among the many worries that exist. Now, here in the UK, Visit England have been quizzing Brits about a whole range of topics for some time. And for those who've said their next trip will not be to a city, they were asked, well, why is that? And because city tourism is just so important in many parts of the world, I thought it was worth sharing the results of that question. Here, the results are broken down by age band. What we can see is that personal well-being fears, well, they're important, but also concerns that the city experience won't be fully available. And that's especially acute among some of the younger age demographics. Now, Visit Britain have looked at international travellers in Asia Pacific, the Middle East and North America, so the long haul markets for the UK and indeed Europe, and asked them about travel intentions for the current year. So what I term the woohoo chart is that the vast majority are saying they are definitely considering an international trip in 2021. But sadly, its sister chart is more of a boohoo chart. We've only got a tiny slither of people in these long haul source markets for the UK and Europe who are saying they've actually booked a trip. Round about a third are saying, well, they've chosen where they're going to go, but they've not made a firm booking. Most people, however, are very much in a holding pattern at the present time. Returning then to the STR analysis, remember this is folks in North America, mainland Europe and the UK, and one of the other questions they were asked was, when do you think you'll next travel long haul? So over on the left in the dark green, we've got 14% who are really keen beans. They're saying, yep, I'm confident enough to travel long haul now if I could. Over on the right in grey, we've got about 1 in 10 who are saying they're just not interested in travelling long haul. Then we've got a similar proportion who are saying it's going to be after 2022. But the insight I really take from this chart is that the bulk of people who were normally in the market for this sort of travel are saying it's going to be 2022. As such, yes, there probably will be some folks who are traveling long haul this year, but for most who do that, it's probably going to be next year. What do Europeans think then about the various travel protocols? This again is this data from the European Travel Commission. On the left of the chart, we can see that there's a large number of people who are saying, I'm feeling really reassured that destinations are putting in place all of these measures and it's making me feel more relaxed. But in many senses, I'm more interested in the data over on the right-hand side of this chart. So about 1 in 5 people who are saying, do you know what? Actually, I think all of these protocols are going to lessen the experience that I'm going to be able to have when I'm traveling. So again, mirroring some of the data that we saw from other sources earlier in the slides. One of the other things that people have talked about is lead times, and a really comprehensive piece of work just put out quite recently by Expedia looks at data from all of their global sites across the first quarter of this year. And this graphic looks at the lead time for searches. And we can see that predominantly searches are for that 0 to 21 day time period. Interesting to spot that Europe, Middle East and Africa, the second set of bars from the left, there are actually more searches going on there for a slightly longer lead time. On then to the issue of vaccination and whether or not it's our route out of the current predicament. Well, the good news is that all of the existing vaccines are largely effective in preventing severe illness and death. But the less good news is that they don't fully prevent infection. So vaccination progress matters here, there, and everywhere, as vaccinated travellers could still transmit the virus among non-vaccinated citizens at their destination. So the upshot of that is that epidemiologically, at least, retaining a requirement for vaccinated travellers to be tested has merit. But this, of course, adds further financial and psychological barriers to what is supposed to be a holiday. Meanwhile, variants continue to pose a potential risk to health and to the early restoration of large-scale, seamless international travel. And I've deliberately included large scale and seamless there. So yes, international travel to some extent has been happening throughout the pandemic. It will increase as we move through 2021, but large scale and seamless are probably not phrases that will apply in at least the near term. On then to some of the common themes for the outlook, and lots of different commentators have had plenty of airtime and column inches to fill over the past year. What have they been saying? Well, they've been saying that it will be 3 or 4 years before tourism is back to where it was in 2019, so mirroring that chart we saw earlier on. Domestic tourism is set to recover more quickly than international tourism. Leisure, especially visits to friends and relatives, will recover more quickly than business tourism and events-related tourism. Fully independent travel is reckoned to recover more quickly than group tours. And there's going to be increased interest in travellers going to rural destinations, enjoying a range of activities, and having more experiential trips. Plus, accelerated digitalization of travel, so using smartphones for COVID passports, all of those sorts of things. So increased digitalization. Now, we have heard a lot about the phrase herd immunity over the past year, but one of the things we need to be aware of is something called herd mentality. Just because all of these projections have been made, it doesn't mean that they're going to come to pass. In a sense, there's strength in aligning yourself with what many others have said, and all of these projections look sensible, but it doesn't mean they necessarily will be right. So finishing then with a perspective. Some of you may have heard of me talking about my 3 M's, so those essential ingredients to recovery. 3 M's being motivation to visit, money to spend, and a means of travel. Very briefly, touching on each of those 3. On motivation, I think we've seen plenty of evidence that potential travellers remain motivated. They've not fallen out of love with the idea of travelling. But some behaviours, perhaps only in the short term, may actually have been changed by the pandemic. On to money to spend. Well, it's fairly clear that in most parts of the world, the young have taken a harder hit economically than the older folks around. It's also my view that we won't really understand the full economic fallout from what's been happening until later this year. But what's also apparent is that for many, they've accumulated savings. Here in the UK, the estimate is that for those who have seen their savings increase, typically it's between £4,000 and £5,000 increase. Key questions, of course, is whether or not those accumulated savings will be spent, and if so, on what types of goods and services. On then to the third M, means of travel. So it's my view that at least in the foreseeable future, international travel in particular is going to be both costlier and clunkier than it was pre-pandemic. That doesn't, of course, mean that people will cease to travel, but it may well dent the overall frequency with which people choose to take trips. And final point then that I'll make before we have our wider discussion is about a fourth M, and which we've in a sense seen emerging through some of the earlier slides, and that's memories. There's a real risk that if the supply side in destinations has been scarred, then the experience that visitors are so desperate to enjoy will have been hampered, which of course reduces the likelihood of positive advocacy. But on balance, people are motivated. Most people do have money. Lots of carriers are wanting to carry travellers. So I think many of those essential ingredients are in place, but the road to recovery is likely to be somewhat crooked and not necessarily as smooth as we might like. With which I will hand back to Rachel to take us through the discussion. So over to you, Rachel.
Thank you very much, David. Lots of interesting information and food for thought in there. And before I bring in Elodie and Santi into the discussion, there was one thing that I picked up on in one of your early slides, actually, David, and is also a question from one of our audience, which is that you showed that chart with the recovery really coming into 2024, i.e. a lot longer than we thought. And I just wondered if there's any sense of what is it that is lengthening the recovery? I mean, is it on the consumer side? Or is it on the infrastructure side with regards to flight routes, etc.? And it actually, as I say, links to a question we had from one of the listeners saying, how optimistic can we be for significant travel demand in the next 6 to 9 months?
So I think there's a mix of explanations for why the recovery is now believed to take up to 3 years. They include both of the things that you mentioned, so uncertainty about how keen consumers are to travel, how affordable they will find travel, and whether or not the supply will be there to meet demand. But as I indicated, I don't think that the recovery will be that smooth line that we saw, so the long side of the lopsided L about which I spoke. My own instinct is that we will probably see a sharper, earlier return to travel, but that may well then peter out. So a bit of a hump, if you like, before flattening off, before recovering again. Why so? Well, there will be very many people who will want to take those trips that were deferred in 2020. So they may well have accepted a refund. So they will be wanting to make good on that. They will be traveling. Plus, there are very, very many people who are just desperate to catch up with international friends and relatives, to celebrate events that have happened over the past year, all of those sorts of things. So I think in the next 6 to 9 months, we may believe, oh, demand is recovering more quickly than we thought. That's really good. But I would strike a note of caution that some of that may be this surge in pent-up demand, and then we really probably have to wait into early 2022 to see whether or not we continue on that growth trajectory, or whether, as I think might happen, is that some of that growth starts to peter out as the economic fallout of the pandemic starts to impact travel frequencies.
Thank you. I'd like to bring in Elodie and Santi into the discussion now, while we're thinking about consumer sentiment and how people are feeling about returning to international travel. And perhaps we could even just start, perhaps coming to Elodie first. What's the current situation in France with regard to international visitors, Elodie?
Well, right now, the borders of the European Union are still closed for visitors. Of course, people are still traveling, but only for business or very strict and clear reasons, and not for just leisure. And there is no quarantine, and the opening of the borders of the European Union is underway. There have been a reaching of an agreement for a digital certificate that should arrive by the end of June, early July. It's still in the works, but they're working on it and they have agreed to it, so it's really coming, and that will mean the opening of the borders and the welcoming again of international visitors, either that have been vaccinated or that have negative tests, recent tests, PCR, or that have recovered from the COVID for over the last 6 months, I believe, which means that they are immune to it. So within these, let's say, lifelines of safety and health, it will be possible to travel to France in a very short while, in only a few weeks. We do have very high hopes for a return of international visitors, because as probably was the case in every country last summer, we only had our national visitors. We had a few of them because we were out of the first wave and not yet into the second wave. But of course, it has nothing to do with a typical season in tourism in France. I only represent the city of Paris, so obviously I am aware that visitors will be looking for areas where there is a lot of space, beaches, mountains, countryside, and Paris may not be their first idea of a trip, but there are people who are hoping to see the destination without the usual crowds and large tourists. So we do expect a number of visitors, of foreign visitors this summer, and of course, obviously, all the steps have been taken to ensure the maximum safety for them.
Yes, indeed, and we will come on to some of those a little later in our discussion. And Santi, I guess obviously Spain and France both part of the EU, so similar rules in general, but is there anything different in Spain with regards to the current rules for international visitors? Santi, I think you're still on mute. Oh, there we go.
Yes, sorry. Well, as you will say, Rachel, both France and Spain form a part of the European Union, and in this sense, our rules and all the measures are similar. We are open to certain countries. For most of them, you need to prove that you test negative, but yet we're open. In fact, we are starting receiving some international tourists. Spain has been the latest European country to announce our intention to open to travelers from outside Europe in time for summer. This is important. So we are piloting a digital health certificate program at all of our 46 airports in Spain. So we hope that we will be fully ready to welcome visitors, not only from the European Union, but also from other source markets around the world by June. And in fact, the number of reservations are increasing day by day. For example, in open air spaces or in natural landscapes or rural tourism, for example, escaping a little bit from massive areas, are increasing quite a lot, over 200 and 400% by every month in a row. So for the summer, we hope that between 30 and 40% of the international tourists who came to the country before the outbreak of the health crisis are expected to arrive, more or less.
Excellent. So it's positive nudgings, at least. One thing I'd like to think about is something that David mentioned was the lead times becoming much shorter, obviously, because people are wanting to make sure that they're going to be able to go and be clear what the quarantine is. So they're holding off until much closer than they would perhaps have done pre-COVID. Do you think that your destinations can cope with that? Because obviously our industry traditionally has sort of two markets, the very long lead and the much shorter one. Do you think, let's say, Spain can cope with much shorter lead times?
Yes, the thing we have to consider, Rachel, in the sense that Spain is one of the top destinations in the world. Well, in 2019, we welcomed over 84 million tourists in Spain, and we are only 46 million inhabitants. So you can get an idea of how important tourism industry is for Spain, 14% of the economy. This also means that Spain is a very competitive country in terms of tourism, and our hotel industry, our DMCs, our travel agencies, tour operators are very flexible, and during the pandemic they have adapted, their procedures. So it's for sure, like David was saying, that last minute travel is not a future trend, it's already happening. So they are very flexible. They are offering special prices and also last minute cancellations without any charge within 24 or 48 hours in advance, so that people are not scared of doing the reservations right now for the forthcoming 2-3 months.
Yes, I think it's interesting to see our industry adapting to this. Like you say, it was a trend that was happening anyway, but it's accelerated. And it's really encouraging to see that we've been able to do that. And is the situation the same in Paris, Elodie, with regard to the short lead time?
Yes, absolutely, Rachel. The situation is the same. In fact, we have even at the tourist office, we have even encouraged our professionals to apply the maximum flexibility in terms of cancellations and change of plans. And that has been the case for a few months now, but it's going really to come into application this summer to encourage people to make plans and feel secure that if situation had to change, they could change their plans as well, and not have a financial toll attached to it. And pretty much all the professionals we have encouraged to do so have eagerly accepted because it means for them that they can have a little logo on their website and on ours that shows that they are part of the Caring Attitude initiative, and that ensures not only the health measures and all the safety for the clients, but also maximum flexibility and understanding of the situation that may change for a number of reasons.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's encouraging to see on the infrastructure side, the industry doing all it can to allay concerns. Of course, there's very little we can do if government regulations change, but everything that's within our control is being addressed. And actually just think now a little bit about more on the sentiment side and visitor safety and actually in destination. So I thought it was quite encouraging to see on David's slides actually that lack of confidence in the destination was quite low on the list as compared with my concerns about quarantine and regulations, etc. In terms of people feeling safe at their destination, this wasn't as big a worry as getting stuck somewhere or the likes of that. So I'm wondering, it would be really useful for us to hear from the two of you some examples of the steps that have been taken to address these and some good practice that you're implementing. And say, Santi, I know it was really encouraging to see the return of FITUR in person recently, which is absolutely fantastic. Could you share some of the examples in Spain around best practice and visitor safety?
Of course, Rachel, we are very happy because in this sense, from the very beginning, safety has been our main concern. I mean, in Seville, in the region of Andalusia, and in Spain as a whole, where we are very proud of the fast reply of both the institutions and the travel sector in our city, concerning the implementation of all the safety measures required to ensure a fully safe stay in our destination. We should remember in this sense that shortly after the beginning of the pandemic, we were one of the very first cities in getting the safe travels stamp developed by the World Travel and Tourism Council. Seville, I mean the city, other destinations in Spain, of course, and highlights of all the measures that we've been working and developing during these months. We could point out the following initiatives. For example, the Seville Airport offers a COVID-19 test service located in the departures terminal to do PCR tests and quick antigen tests to passengers and crew who need to prove these tests have been made while traveling. This is very important in order to recover our airline normal activity. And also a region of Andalusia, the destination of the whole region, provides all non-resident international travelers with free COVID insurance for stays at any type of regulated establishment in the region during the whole year. And also I would like, last but not least, a key example of good practice in the destination. You were mentioning Fitur, which has been a success. We are very happy, because we've been doing a lot there, like presentations, meetings, and presenting also our new tourist brand. In November, during the hard times of the pandemic, I would like to speak about the successful organization of the first edition of the Tourism Innovation Summit in Seville. We held it at the end of November last year, and it was the only major international professional on-site event in the fourth third of 2020. We had over 1,200 attendees from 16 countries. We have the COVID test at the entrance. So like Fitur this time, you had to prove that you tested negative before entering the premises. So we had connections via streaming from all over the world, but this has been a very important success for us as a host city for international events.
Indeed. And Elodie, what's the situation in Paris with regards to the steps that you're taking to address the concerns about safety?
So as I mentioned briefly earlier, we have created the Caring Attitude initiative. We put it together last summer when we thought the worst was over, and then it just kept on existing, even though the visitors were not allowed to come back for a while. And it's on, and it's more than ready. It's been ready for a few months. It's been let's say polished, and it's been joined by more and more professionals. And it's an initiative. It's 7 steps that all Parisian professionals pledge to take to ensure the safety of the visitors. And it starts with the training of the staff, with the safety measures, with the health and hygiene measures that have been taken to clean a hotel room, to take care of visitors on a cruise boat or in a restaurant, for example. And then it continues with the flexibility measures and the refunding measures I was mentioning earlier, going towards all the technology, the use of technology for the payment or for the menu at the restaurant, and all these technologies that are ready and that have been encouraged to be used. Obviously, we have the measures our government are imposing, such as the number of maximum people per square meter in a museum or in a restaurant, the fact that at this time restaurants can only be open outside, and they will be open inside only in June, a little bit later. We still have a curfew on, and in June, and then July will go back, and then it will disappear. So there are the measures that are for all of France that are dictated by the government, and then there are the measures that are taken independently, or in the case of Paris, at the measure of the city, as we lead the pack of tourism professionals. And I have to say that judging from what we see in the last few days, what we have seen in the restaurants, in the bars, in the movie theaters, in the museums. Everything is running pretty smoothly. Everybody has taken the habit of booking, which was something we did not do much before, except in places like the Eiffel Tower or the Louvre. But now it has become compulsory. You have to book in advance. It ensures that every place knows exactly how many people are in at what time, and there is no too many people at any time. And I firmly believe that it's something that will remain after the crisis. And it's a good thing for a good visiting experience, a good experience in a museum, in a monument, where you know that there will never be more than under a number of people. Right now, this number has to be quite low, of course, because the rule is 8 square meters per person at all times. So it means not too many people at the same time, but at least it will save these hours of lines that people used to take at the Louvre or the Eiffel Tower or at Versailles at the top of the summer in previous years. Now we can safely say that these times are over, and people are not only in France, pretty much everywhere. They now know that they have to make plans. They have to book. They have to make sure that they can go to a place. So they book, and since they book, they have a ticket with a date and a time on it, and it means that when they arrive on time, they will queue not at all or very, very shortly. So it actually makes for a better tourist experience, a better use of the time that the visitors have when they are in Paris. And hopefully, and that's what we're working on, hopefully an enlarged experience. It means going to different places within our destination, maybe exploring a little bit more, maybe going away from where the crowds are, trying to see what else there is, where we can have maybe less people, small groups, maybe more unusual sights and experiences. And that's what we're working on to make the most of any trip to Paris.
Thank you. You make a very interesting point there, Elodie, which is something that I've been thinking about. I mean, it seems such a long time ago now that we were talking about over-tourism. And obviously I know, Santi, in Spain, cities like Barcelona, that had been an issue. It just seems like a lifetime ago now. And I think your point, Elodie, about educating the tourist into a different experience is something I've been thinking about in terms of what becomes firmly embedded in the tourism landscape post-COVID. And perhaps, David, I could bring you in on this now. In terms of sentiment, do we think long term visitors will be prepared to trade off this having to make plans and book in advance in return for having a less crowded experience and perhaps a more authentic one, which of course pre-COVID, this sort of desire for the authentic national experience was a really important part of a trip? And do we think that visitors will go, yes, actually, I'm happy to do that because I know when I go to the Eiffel Tower, it's going to be amazing because I'll actually be able to see and I won't be squashed up, etc. And what's your feeling, David, with regards to that?
I think that there will certainly be those who value that, especially, and I'm sure this will be the case, but especially if all of the visitor attractions ensure that lower volume of people have an absolutely wonderful experience. But one of the things that troubles me a little bit is serendipity. I think serendipity is wonderful where you can just happen across a visitor attraction. And we have to make sure that we don't turn every holiday into a military planning exercise where you have to know what you're doing each and every hour of the day. So yes, I fully agree with everything that Elodie said about it allowing visitors to have a more wholesome and more enjoyable experience. But I do think there's a little bit of a concern in terms of, well, what are all those people who try to book but are told, sorry, we're full? We need to be sure that somehow destinations through tourist offices, through hoteliers, can intervene and make sure that there's plenty of other suggestions and ideas about what those visitors can do instead, so that they don't just go home disappointed?
Yes, and that's actually another point that feeds into what Elodie was saying, is that, for many, certainly European destinations, it's been a long-held desire to sort of channel people out of the big hubs and to experience more of the country. And this idea that if I've got lots of other things to do, I could maybe take a day or two outside of Paris or Seville or do something like that. Santi, is that something that is on the wish list for Spain in terms of promoting the more rural areas? Could you tell us a bit about that?
It is indeed, Rachel, and it has been, as you were mentioning before, a serious concern for certain urban destinations in Spain, like is the case of Barcelona. Seville, we are the third most popular urban destination in Spain, right after Madrid and Barcelona. And we have taken advantage of all these quiet months during the pandemic in order to revamp the destination, to change the mind of the stakeholders, of the local partners. So we have created, from the very beginning of the health crisis, a project called Plan 8, with several measures in order to recover the destination as soon as possible. And one of the main goals was to fight for authenticity, to make people stay longer, and to to expand a little bit all the visits with different tours and different trails around the city, because Seville has a vast historical center, over 4 square kilometers. Our historical center can only compare to cities like Venice in terms of size, and also in terms of attractions and masterpieces which are worth visiting. So in this sense, we have been working hard in order to present in Fitur our new brand of city. You can see the logo at my back. This logo is brand new logo, Sevilla. You can see the shadow of the name Sevilla, because this refers to the fact that we have over 300 days of sunshine. And also the shadow is what's in the dark. People think that they know Seville very well. It's a very popular destination, but there are so many things to do and see which are off the beaten track. And in fact, our motto is Seville, so famous, so unknown, so that people are aware of the fact that there are so many new things that they can discover. Like, I don't only mean monuments or museums or convents, palaces, which are so many in the city, but especially experiences, because we are like the essence of Spain in terms of culture. We are a very modern city, but also the cradle of flamenco, the typical gastronomy, the Spanish art, and the joie de vivre, the joy for life. And well, yeah, of course, this is one of our main concerns and one of our main strategies now.
And indeed, Elodie, I would imagine Paris has a sort of list of places off the beaten track that it could promote. Could you give us a few examples of those that might be perhaps newer ideas for people who've even been to Paris several times over? What would be the new things?
Well, there are 2 things in your question. There are the new things, and there are a number of new things this year, because everything that was supposed to open last year was postponed to this year. So now we have this back-to-back openings. It's pretty much very exciting, actually. There was the Bourse de Commerce that opened only last week. And then we're moving on to the Musée Carnavalet that's opening in the Hôtel de la Marine, and so on and so on. So these are the new things, but we do know that they will attract a lot of attention, a lot of visitors. They are already, I was trying this morning to book for a friend for the Bourse de Commerce, and the first ticket I got was in July. So it's already fully booked all through June. So these are the new places with a lot of press, a lot of attention, and a lot of people. And then there are the other new things that are not new, but they seem new for visitors because they were completely overlooked for the last time they came. And this is a lot of what we do at the tourist office is is trying to, let's say, encourage visitors to not only stay and visit the heart, the center, the core of Paris, but try to look a little bit further out. And I don't even mean the suburbs. I mean, still within the city of Paris, there are many areas that are completely overlooked by tourists. They are definitely worth it. It could be one of our street art neighborhoods, extremely popular for Instagrammers, for example. But still, it's not in the core of the city, which means that a lot of people, even if they know it exists because they've seen a picture here and there, they don't go there because it seems, oh, it's too far away. And when I mean too far, usually it means 5 or 6 metro stops. So it means 8 minutes. But still, people tend to cram as much as they can in a very short time. So it means that they just run from a monument to a museum. And so it seems like a waste of time to take the metro for 5 stations and just go see what's in the next neighborhood. So it can be areas for street art. It can be, for example, the cemetery de Père Lachaise, very famous, visited by millions every year because, among others, Jim Morrison's grave is there. So a lot of people go there, but they just take the metro, arrive at the gate, try to find the tram, run and get lost most of the time, and then go back, jump on the next metro and go back to where they came from. And they don't even think that just around this cemetery, within it and around it, there are many more things to do, to see, interesting, curious, what we call le Paris des Parisiens, the real Paris, or the Paris where Parisians actually live and go out and go eat and go shop as well. And anyone who is a little bit curious and wants to take the time, and when I mean the time, it's maybe 2 hours, it's not much, to just explore those little streets. They are not in their guidebooks because they don't have internationally famous museums or monuments, so they are not in the guidebooks, but they are definitely worth it for an experience that you're proud to say when you go home, oh, and I've seen this incredible little street with little shops, and what's more is there was not a single tourist around, and it was just, you feel that you're the only one to have discovered it, and you feel very let's say lucky to have found. I mean, we're talking about an international capital, so you will probably not find anything, but you will feel like you're finding something and you're the only one to have seen it. We have a number of, I mean, almost endless number of side streets, little areas, cafe corners, corner cafes, I mean, and even around the flea market. The flea market is extremely famous, but it's not in the center of Paris. So even if that one is in the guidebooks, it feels far away only because you need to take the metro to go there. And I mean 6 or 7 stops, it's nothing. It's including in your metro pass, so you don't even have to pay extra to go there. But still, oh, no, I don't have time. So now we have the luck, and also it's a tricky subject, probably for another panel another time, but the Airbnb situation, one of the results of it is that people are staying away from where they used to stay. They are staying in a larger perimeter because all of Paris is on Airbnb now. And it makes for people to just, they walk out of the building where they're renting an apartment, and instead of just going down the metro and take the metro to the Louvre or Versailles or Notre Dame or elsewhere, they go have breakfast in the corner cafe or find this little restaurant that looks cute, and then tonight they'll come back earlier to have dinner at that one. It's not in any of the guidebooks, but it looks good. It probably is. And so they end up walking around and buying their baguette and croissant in the boulangerie around the corner. And it makes for a city that belongs, the entire city belongs to the tourists. And it was very visible before the COVID pandemic as well, of course, but it will come back, and we're fairly confident that now that the tourists, they are they are fearless. They come, they're well traveled. They have been to other cities. They know that they can get around. I mean, they have a smartphone in the hand. They have Google Map on it. So they are not lost. They cannot get lost. And so they feel more confident to explore a little bit. And our job is to give them the tools, the keys, and the ideas of what to do. It's fine to want to explore and so on, but what we do is we give them ideas of what to do. Maybe take a tour on the theme of Black people. There is a great tour. It's Black Paris, very, very popular with American visitors, for example. And that is not in the center of Paris, not at all. And it's a fantastic experience. It's just one example among many, many others.
Yeah, I think it's an encouraging point that you make there, Elodie, about the recovery paving the way for a new visitor experience. In many ways, the ones that people had been wanting to have before, but perhaps it wasn't such a clear pathway. And David, just touching with regards to accommodation there on the point that Elodie mentioned about, a preference perhaps for Airbnb and those being perhaps not in the direct centre of the city. And do you have any sense from your research on what the recovery is like for the hotel sector? I mean, are we seeing a dent because people are wanting to do self-catering, for example, or is that not such a big deal in the big cities?
I think it's almost, there's a stage before accommodation. It's this idea that people, at least in summer 2021, are going to be thinking about countryside, coastline, uncrowded destinations. And as such, they will perhaps be gravitating towards self-catering types of accommodation, which are more often found in those sorts of destinations. And as such, some of the larger cities where you will find an awful lot of hotels may find summer 2021 more of a challenge than rural areas. Clearly, pre-pandemic, there was strong growth in the volume of people staying in Airbnb, in the sense that dovetails in with this idea of today's visitors really wanting to have more of a local, authentic experience. But hotels absolutely will still have a place for business tourism as and when it starts to recover, but also for leisure. It's just that they're probably going to have to adapt the way they deliver their food and beverage service. They're probably going to have to put in place those very flexible regimes for booking that you could always get a flexible cancellation policy in the past, but now that's the norm. It may well be that will continue to be the norm for the longer term. So I don't think it's that there will be a permanent shift away from the more traditional hotel towards self-catering, but some of those trends that we saw pre-pandemic have been influenced by the pandemic.
Indeed. Oh, Santi, you have your finger up.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. This is very interesting, and I would like to add something from our perspective. Of course, hotels have their place still after pandemic. I'd like to mention what we are doing in Seville right now. There was a bit of a feeling of a reluctancy of the local population against Airbnbs on private homes, like being turned into tourist residences before the pandemic. They were growing very rapidly. And now the trend is different in the sense that people feel safer in hotels because of the pandemic. This is something we should consider. In fact, in Seville, in the city of Seville, we are a cultural, leisure, also events and congresses destination in Spain, famous for many things, but these are our strengths. And now there are more than 23 hotels which are about to open, brand new hotels who have been designed before the pandemic and built during the pandemic. And all of them are either 4+ or 5-star hotels. And many of them, because we have about 23,000 hotel beds in Seville, in the city alone, and 60% of which are either 4 or 5 stars. Boutique hotels, very authentic hotels, so that you can really feel that you are in Seville and not elsewhere. So I think that you can also feel the authenticity of the destination if you choose the proper hotel. And we are very proud of that in Seville, because most of the hotels we have, apart from big brands or international chains, of course, which are necessary, we have this typical boutique, charming hotel in a manor house, in a former convent, in a complex of a small neighborhood in the historical district, so that you can really feel that you are in Seville.
Indeed. Makes me want to go there.
You're welcome.
And now we're coming into the last few minutes of our session now. And I just want to turn briefly to the subject of sustainability with regards to recovery, because we've had a question from the audience as we've been speaking, which is really asking whether the market is offering all the same product as before, or has there been any opportunity to offer something different with regards to sustainability in mind, because we've sort of had this pause. I don't know if anyone wants to come in first on that. David, you look like you had something to say. I don't know if you were just moving your face. But
it wasn't necessarily intentional, but I will say something briefly. I think that sustainability was clearly around pre-pandemic, and there were growing concerns about the climate impact of travel and tourism businesses. That is going to return. Clearly, we have the COP26 conference in Glasgow later in the year. We'll see what emerges from that. But the requirement for all sectors of the economy to be more aware about its impact on the environment is going to increase rather than diminish as we move forward. And it's clear that particularly among younger demographics, there is a real appetite to understand the impact that the businesses that they are dealing with are having. So there is a real compulsion, I think, on travel and tourism to grasp that opportunity. And it should be seen as an opportunity rather than just as a threat. But yes, sustainability in its broadest sense really is going to matter more in the remainder of the 2020s than it did in the 2010s.
Indeed, thank you. As I say, just the last couple of minutes as we wrap up. Santi, is there anything else you'd like to add, either on sustainability or any last point before we wish our audience a good day?
Well, yes, I absolutely agree with David in the sense, and this is also one of the ideas against over-tourism. It's already a trend. Before the pandemic, customers are looking for establishments with a clearly responsible vocation, that's for sure. People will look for more sustainable and enriching experiences. And of course, our visitors will be fleeing from globalization in consumption. And we are working very hard in order to make sure that Seville is a very authentic. Seville is the real thing. And only would like to add that, people, please come to Seville. We are ready to welcome you back again.
Thank you. And Elodie, last word goes to Paris.
Well, of course, come to Paris. I'll say, just as Santi said, come to Paris. We're open for business. We're almost open to business in terms of international travel. But apart from that, as soon as the borders open, we are open. The hotels are opening one by one. They are recalling their employees, and they are ready to open and operate. And just on the subject of sustainability, it's absolutely very trendy, not only in terms of fashion, but also in terms of it. I mean, it's the way that the history goes. We have to think sustainability. We are lucky to have a very, very good network of train and high-speed train transportation in Europe. So it means that, of course, if visitors arrive from Japan or from New York, they have to fly in to visit Europe. But from the moment they set foot out of their airplane, they can do everything by public transportation, by ground transportation. It means trains, it means metro, it means a bicycle. And in a city like Paris, it means walking. Walking is as sustainable as can get. It's easy, it's safe. The city has opened a number of walking paths, and I mean a 3-kilometer uninterrupted walking path along the River Seine. It's highly popular right now. with restaurants and bars along the river. So it means discovering the city, experiencing the city, and keeping in mind that whatever we do has an impact on the environment. Choosing a restaurant that serves locally grown food and that serves the local economy because it's not part of a major chain, but it's locally owned. Every single step taken when we organize a trip has an impact on the destination, has an impact on the planet. And I think our visitors are more and more aware of that, and they are more and more curious about how do I choose this or that? What impact did it have? We have a lot of information.
Elodie, I'm afraid I have got a message from the organisers that we're out of time. I would love to hear some more. We will have to have another session, and we have run out of time. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining. Thank you, David, Elodie, and Santi, and I wish you all a very productive Arabian travel market. Thank you and goodbye.